All right, so get ready for a deep dive today because we're tackling Stalin.
Oh boy.
Yeah, a big one, and I think it'll be a fun one.
Absolutely.
This is a question that has sparked, I think, countless debates among historians.
Definitely.
Did World War I's legacy play a big part in Stalin's rise, or was it just a small piece of the puzzle?
Right.
Was it the main cause, a catalyst, or practically insignificant?
Yeah.
We're going to be kind of looking at all that today, and we're drawing on a variety of sources for this one.
Mm.
History books, articles, even a biography of Stalin, a podcast episode about his early life.
Wow.
A lot of great material out there, a
Mm.
lot of it inspired by the work of Russell Tarr over at www.activehistory.co.uk.
A fantastic resource.
Yeah, a big shout out to him.
Yeah, for sure.
So to even begin to answer this question, you
Right.
can't just look at Stalin in the 1920s when he was already kind of, on his way to becoming dictator.
Yeah, you gotta rewind.
Got to rewind even further.
Back to his childhood.
To his childhood, exactly.
Hey.
Like solving a mystery, we need all those early clues to see how they maybe shaped him.
For sure.
So picture this. Pre-World War I Russia,
Okay.
we've got young Joseph Stalin, nicknamed Soso,
Yeah.
growing up in Gori, Georgia.
Yeah.
Not exactly, born with the silver spoon.
Definitely not. No, he was born into poverty
Yeah, yeah.
and faced a lot of hardships.
Really tough upbringing.
Yeah. And that, along with kind of a rebellious streak, even as a kid, paints a picture of someone who was already used to challenging authority, fighting for what he believed in.
And it wasn't just that. I mean, on top of the social and economic circumstances, he had some significant physical challenges too.
Oh, yeah.
Sources mention smallpox scarring,
Yeah.
a carriage accident that left him with a limp, one arm shorter than the other.
It's incredible.
It makes you wonder how all that might have impacted how he saw the world.
Well, it's certainly possible it contributed to a really deep desire for control,
Yeah.
Almost like he needed to overcompensate
Right.
for those perceived weaknesses.
Uh-huh.
Think about it. If you're constantly being underestimated or dismissed because of how you look, you might develop a stronger drive to prove yourself,
Mm-hmm.
assert your dominance.
Yeah.
Right.
It's almost like the classic underdog story.
But with a dark twist.
Yeah, a much darker twist.
For sure.
And speaking of twists, his early life, it's full of them.
Oh, yeah.
He went to seminary school for a while.
Which is so interesting.
Yeah.
That's where he first encountered Marxist ideas.
Talk about a plot twist.
I know, right?
Aspiring priest to revolutionary.
Yeah, and this is where things start to get really interesting.
This is where it gets good.
He leaves the seminary
Yeah.
and ends up organizing Georgia's first major labor strike.
That's impressive.
It really shows his natural leadership skills
Yeah.
and organizational skills, which are super important in his later political career.
Of course, yeah.
This is also where that reputation for ruthlessness starts to come out.
Oh, and how can we forget about the Tiflis bank robbery in 1907?
Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
I mean, the sources mention it was the equivalent of $4 million today.
That is wild.
It's just crazy.
That event cemented his status as a hardened revolutionary.
Yeah.
Someone who wasn't afraid to use violence or even criminal tactics to get what he wanted.
It's so different from the image we often think of when we think of Stalin.
Right, the stoic, pipe-smoking dictator.
Yeah, it's like we're seeing this whole other side of him.
A glimpse behind the curtain.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
we've got this complex figure,
Right.
a product of poverty, the
Yeah.
physical challenges, that rebellious spirit, and now he's deep in the revolutionary movement.
Yeah, and this is where we have to start thinking about World War I
Okay,
and how it might have crossed paths with his personal journey.
right.
Remember, we're trying to figure out just how big of a role the war played in him eventually rising to power. Did it create the perfect conditions for him to succeed, or was he already on that path no matter what?
That is the question.
Yeah, the million-ruble question.
So we've set the stage with Stalin's early life, all those experiences that may have shaped him.
Right.
Now let's throw World War I into the mix.
It's 1914. Things are about to get a whole lot more complicated.
Yeah, it's a turning point for the world. And as we're trying to figure out how this impacted Stalin's path,
Right.
we have to remember that during the war itself, Stalin wasn't exactly a household name.
No, not at all. He was more in the background.
He wasn't leading the charge like Lenin and Trotsky were at the time.
Exactly. More like a chess player,
I like that.
strategically biding his time, waiting for the right opportunity.
Building his network within the party,
Absolutely.
kind of watching how the whole war was reshaping the political landscape.
All those moving pieces.
But he wasn't completely out of the spotlight, right?
Well, there was that incident.
Yeah, the exile to Siberia.
Betrayed by a double agent.
Seriously, talk about high stakes?
Talk about a story.
It's crazy.
But in a way that exile might have actually helped Stalin in the long run. It gave him time to really dig into political theory.
So, like, all that time to just read and think.
Yeah, solidify his understanding of Marxism and even
Ian.
learn English secretly.
Wait, hold on. Learning English in secret.
Yeah,
That sounds more like a calculated move than just something to do to pass the time.
right.
Like he had something in mind.
He was always thinking ahead while his rivals saw him as just a gray blur.
That's what one of the sources called him, right?
Yeah, they totally underestimated him.
And all the while he's learning English, probably giving him access to information and ideas that others didn't have.
That kind of strategic thinking would become his trademark later on.
So he's playing the long game, even in exile.
Always.
It makes you wonder, did he see Lenin's death coming? Did he anticipate that power vacuum?
It's a question historians still debate to this day.
You should think.
What we do know is that Lenin's death in 1924 was a huge turning point.
It was like the starting pistol for the race to succeed him.
Exactly, and Stalin, despite not being the obvious frontrunner, was absolutely in the running.
And this is where all those years of preparation, all that networking within the party starts to pay off.
For sure.
So while Trotsky was relying on his charisma, his revolutionary reputation, Stalin's taking a different approach.
Much more methodical.
Yeah, less about the flash, more about the substance.
He knew how important it was to build loyalty among party members, especially those in key positions.
You've been appointed general secretary in 1922, right?
Yep, 1922, and it seemed like just a bureaucratic role at the time.
But it gave him control over party appointments, so much power behind the scenes.
Yeah, he understood the mechanics of the party better than almost anyone.
So while Trotsky's giving these fiery speeches, Stalin's quietly amassing power.
It's almost like he was playing 3D chess while everyone else was still figuring out checkers.
Okay, that's a great analogy.
And then there's the drama with Lenin's testament.
Oh yeah, that document that criticized Stalin pretty harshly.
Called out his potential for abuse of power.
Didn't that threaten his chances of becoming leader?
It definitely had the potential.
Especially since it pointed out some of his weaknesses.
But the other party leaders, they were afraid of what the testament said about them.
So they kept it quiet.
It was self-preservation, but it ended up helping Stalin.
Wow, so even when his flaws were exposed, his rival's fear helped him out.
It's like something out of Shakespeare.
Destiny playing its hand.
And Stalin didn't just stand by, he actually offered to resign as general secretary.
Oh, playing the victim card.
It was brilliant.
Yeah, garnering sympathy and further solidifying his position.
It showed how little his rivals understood him.
He always seemed to be one step ahead.
Yeah, constantly analyzing, adapting his approach, using every opportunity to his advantage.
And now we come back to this crucial question. Did all the chaos of World War I create the perfect environment for someone like Stalin to rise?
Did the war itself make a difference, or was it just the backdrop to his own ambition?
All right, so we've gone from Stalin's rebellious youth to a pretty cunning political operator.
Yeah, especially after World War I.
Right, but we still got to figure out just how much the war itself pushed him to the top.
Right. Was it the reason or just one factor among many?
Was it the driving force or just a piece of the puzzle?
Exactly.
I mean, one of the biggest arguments connecting World War I to Stalin's rise
Yeah.
is all the economic chaos the war caused.
Right. Shortages, inflation.
People were just desperate for some kind of stability.
Totally. And after all that instability, they're going to be more willing to accept a strong man.
Someone who promises to fix it all.
Especially someone who seems disciplined and decisive.
And Stalin, with his image,
Totally fit the bill.
yeah, he seemed like he had all the answers.
At least to some people.
But it wasn't just the economic fallout.
Right.
The war also had a huge impact on the Bolshevik Party itself.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, think about it. Key figures died in the war,
A lot of experience lost.
and a new generation of members came in.
Many of them without the same revolutionary experience.
Yeah, and that creates a totally different dynamic.
A vacuum in the party.
The old Bolsheviks,
Yeah.
the ones who might have challenged Stalin,
They're gone.
and the new members,
Maybe a little easier to manipulate.
to control as Stalin's consolidating power.
Yeah, so that's one way the war could have helped him.
But some people argue that while the war did create opportunities, it all comes down to Stalin's personality.
Yeah, he took advantage of those opportunities.
So was he a product of his time, shaped by the war and the revolution, or was he always going to end up in power?
It's like the nature versus nurture debate.
Right, how much of who we are comes from our circumstances and how much is just built in.
It's Fascinating.
When we think back to those early stories
Right.
about his criminal activity, his willingness to use violence,
It was there long before the war.
yeah, like maybe World War I just gave him the stage to really put his ambition on display.
Maybe it was the perfect setting for someone like him.
And that's what historians are still trying to figure out.
Yeah. Was the war the key that unlocked everything?
Or just the background to his own ambition.
Tough question.
What we can say for sure is that Stalin was a master strategist.
Oh, no doubt.
He understood how to use power to get what he wanted.
And he was ruthless about it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
it seems like there's no easy answer.
Not really.
World War I definitely had a huge impact on Russia,
Absolutely.
and it created the conditions that made Stalin's rise more likely.
For sure.
But his personality played a huge part too.
We can't ignore that.
Yeah, his ruthlessness, his cunning, his willingness to use every single opportunity to his advantage.
That was all him.
It reminds us that history isn't always a simple cause and effect.
Right.
It's about people making choices.
And how those choices changed things.
And in Stalin's case, those choices
Oh, yeah.
led to one of the most brutal dictatorships in history.
It's a scary thought.
It really makes you think about unchecked ambition,
And the forces that shaped the world.
even the ones from long ago.
Speaking of which, if you want to dig deeper into this, I highly recommend checking out those resources we mentioned.
Especially the work of Russell Tarr.
He's got some great stuff over at www.activehistory.co.uk.
Big shout out to Russell for inspiring this whole deep dive.
Definitely.
It's been a wild ride,
As always,
but hopefully it's made you curious to keep learning and questioning.
that's what it's all about.
After all, history's full of mysteries waiting for us to unravel them.
That's the fun part.
Exactly. So, until next time, keep those history books open and those minds engaged.